I mean, it's unclear to me why a school would want to put together children who are 13 years old with children who are 5 years old. It's permitted, but it's currently permitted under the law.
But
the
this
current
is what the law says.
The current law allows children of different ages to be put together. Our initiative also allows children of different ages to be put together. There's no change from the current law.
Now, Donna,
what we're hoping to do under the initiative is explain to me the process of a one-year English immersion class. What if it takes more than that?
The initiative says, the initiative doesn't restrict it to simply 1 year. It says normally the period of time required to teach young children English is no more than 1 year. Once the children have learned English, they're then moved into a regular English language program. But they're only moved into such a program once they've learned English properly.
Ms. Ray, is 1 year enough?
There is nothing in this initiative that tests whether or not children should be moved. It says, we're talking about a law here. We have to read these words. And Mr. Unz says, oh no, that's not really going to happen except maybe in a rural school, or it's not really going to happen except maybe in some school where they decide to do it. The point is this is what the state will mandate if this initiative passes. If the Ron Unz initiative passes in June, we're stuck with it.
Well, let me ask you this. Should it take, right now,
we can't change this initiative once it passes, except by a 2/3 vote of the legislature and a signature of the governor, or another initiative. It's very important.
Well, let me ask you this. Right now, it is taking the way the bilingual education is set up in our state, approximately 5 to 7 years for a non-English speaking student to eventually become proficient in the language. Now, are we just spending that time? Should it take 5 to 7 years? Or are we just coddling these children? Are they actually learning English? Or are we just putting them in the system like a ship just floating in the ocean?
Well, the point here is that this is not a referendum on how long children should be being taught English. This says that children shall be taught English for only 1 year.
It doesn't say
It says it right here. It says children who are English learners shall be educated through sheltered English immersion during a temporary transition period, not normally intended to exceed 1 year. The only way any child can get extra help is if they meet very strict requirements for a waiver. But I want to point out a very important, and I'm sure it's unintended, Mr. Unz, a very important consequence of this initiative. It actually denies children under the age of 10 who test below average in English exams any additional English instruction. Kids who most need the help won't be able to get it if Ron Unz's initiative passes.
But that isn't true.
No,
It is true.
You're saying from the information that I received that parents would be allowed to keep their children in English bilingual education programs if they do receive a waiver or they feel it is best for the child. What are the requirements for that waiver? Parents should know that.
There are a couple of different ways the waiver can be obtained. One of them is if the child is an older child. In other words, if the child is 10 years or older, you simply have to meet with the teachers or the principal of the local school and get them to agree that it's better if the child be in a bilingual program or some other type of English language acquisition program. For younger children, where bilingual education probably is less necessary and English language acquisition is probably better immediately, you would have to get the agreement of the office of the local superintendent. So in other words, the local school district would decide whether or not to grant the waiver. Some school districts could grant a waiver much more easily than others, and those issues would be under the authority of individual school districts.
God, I don't know, I'm exhausted hearing all those waiver requirements. But let me ask you this, Mr. Unz.
Sure.
What about the child under the age of 10 who has no particular special needs, but who tests at, the 40th percentile in their class? We're not talking about a learning impaired kid, just a kid who needs that little extra push. They're denied a waiver here.
They're not denied it.
They are. The only way you can get a waiver is if the child is over the age of 10, has a special need. That's what's in here.
We're running into time requirement here. We're going to take a quick commercial break right now, and our discussion on bilingual education in our state continues right after this. Welcome back to Online. Today we're talking about bilingual education in California. Now, come June, you will likely be asked to either support or turn down a controversial ballot proposal. Instead of giving immigrant children years to master the English language, it calls for approximately 1 year of English immersion before mainstreaming kids right into standardized classrooms. With us are Ron Unz, a businessman and former Republican candidate for governor. He is spearheading the initiative. And Kelly Hayes-Raitt, representing a consortium which thinks the Unz plan is wrong. Now, before we went to the break, we were talking about the waivers, that if parents did not want their children involved in the English immersion program or preferred them to be in bilingual education programs, they could get a waiver to do that. If the children have limited English skills, chances are their parents have limited English skills. Parents may not be able to speak English that well themselves, so how can they understand what would be required of them to get one of these waivers?
Well, obviously, parents don't know the system. It's more difficult for them to get a waiver under any circumstances, but that's true today. In other words, many parents have been trying to get their children out of bilingual education and taught English for years without any success. One thing I will say, it'll be much easier to get a child into bilingual education under our initiative than it is today to get a child out of bilingual education, where parents have to pick at a school to force that school to teach English to their child.
Donna, that's simply not true. Today, all a parent has to do to get a child out of bilingual education is to write a letter to the principal. That's what's in the current school election code. And by law, that principal is required to remove that child and put that child into a regular classroom.
What options would they have?
That's what parents are allowed to do right now.
Then why do they have to pick at a school?
Under the Ron Unz initiative, they would have to come down to the school, learn about what all the programs are, have a conversation with the principal. Then, if their child meets one of those very strict waiver requirements that we discussed before the break, then the child can be put into an additional English instruction classroom if there are 19 other children from the same school and the same grade who also meet those requirements and whose parents also have the time to come down to the school. I mean, talk about hoops you have to jump through, and this is what we're going to codify in law. But you know what? There are two other unintended consequences of this initiative. One is that it virtually eliminates, it absolutely eliminates local control.
Now that is a concern because some school districts feel that they do have successful bilingual education programs. What happens to them?
Well, I agree with that. I'd like to say I think by and large in the state of California, bilingual education has been a complete failure. In fact, it's interesting that my opponent refuses to defend bilingual education in any way. On the other hand, California is a very big state, and even if something is a failure overall, I'm sure there are many, many, many individual bilingual education programs that are good programs and should be allowed to continue. Our initiative will allow them to continue.
Oh, where? How?
Those programs, for example, where the parents support their child being in the program and have the support of a local school district, will be allowed to continue with almost no difficulty.
Is that correct that it would take the 19, that figure 19? Right. Now, what if there are 15? Where are those people going to go?
What would happen is districts then would set up bilingual education magnet schools. So in other words, if there aren't enough children at a given school to support such a program, say if there are only 1 or 2 children whose parents want bilingual education at a school, it's not possible for that school to offer such a curriculum. But what the district can do is set up a school where all the children from these different schools get together and have such a program.
Could we be setting ourselves up to where we have 2,000 different programs going on in every community across the state? And where do we win with something like that?
Probably not. I mean, what we're really talking about is the vast majority of these parents, the overwhelming majority of them, want their children taught English right away. My guess would be that probably 98 or 97% of all the bilingual education programs in California will disappear once our initiative passes and they truly become voluntary. However, the remaining 2 or 3% will be able to continue. And those parents who want them can certainly send their children there.